that is like literally unrecognizable to an ancient African.
You know what I'm saying? It's urban apologetics. You know what I'm saying? Showing black dignity with the gospel.
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, the real Adam Coleman. Y'all know what it is, the Tru-ID Apologetics. And we back at you one more again, man. Got a couple guests here. Y'all know what it is. We got the Southern Assassin, MJ Jackson. You know what I mean? We got A Mac on the attack. How y'all feeling, man?
Feeling great, man. Great time of year.
Yes.
Cool.
Hang out with you, esteemed philosophers and apologists. Trying to catch what y'all got.
Man.
Not the Rona.
Likewise. No. Yeah, well, I ain't got the Rona, so you're not gonna catch that Omarion for me. You know what I'm saying? I'm good. I'm good. Yo, so we do have a little bit of bad news, man. I just right before we hit record, man, got news that Madden passed away, man. That's crazy, bro. That's crazy. You know, anybody who's a football fan and you know what I mean, a video game fan. You know, people know about Madden. You know, that's crazy right there. So, you know,
that's so crazy.
Yeah, hats off to John Madden, you know. But yeah, so Alex, man, it's been a while. You've been on the channel. MJ's been a while. Y'all tell us what's been going on, man. We'll start with Alex, man. How you been doing, man? What you been up to?
Yeah, man, I'm doing pretty well. All things considered, like everyone else, but trying to really finish this year strong and get a good jump on next year. So, for those that follow my channel, Relentless Pursuit of Purpose. I have some exciting things coming next year. We're gonna be launching our first online course next year as well. Stay tuned for that. Cool. And got one more video dropping this year. I'm gonna do like a year-end highlight or something like that.
Okay. Highlight reel.
These two guests are probably gonna make an appearance, just so y'all know.
Okay, cool. That's what's up. It's been an exciting year, man. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, man. You guys gave me an idea. I might do something similar, man. That'd be pretty dope if we all kind of had like a collage.
Oh yeah.
You know, like a UA collage type of thing, man. That'd be dope. That'd be dope. Yeah, man. How about you, MJ? What you been up to, dog?
Oh man, I finished my first master's. That was I'm celebrating. God is good. You know.
Congratulations, brother.
You said your first master's?
Yeah, I'll be starting the MTS program January the 10th.
Okay.
So, first two classes will be Faith and Reason and Public Theology. I'm looking forward to Public Theology. That's my deal right there.
Yeah.
So got a year's review popping off on Friday with a CBS Apologist in Detroit. So just trying to stay consistent. I could stand to be a little bit more consistent like you two, brother. So that'll be my goal that I'm striving for in 2022.
Oh, don't be like me, man. Yeah, you don't want to do that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm out here having kids and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's been stifling my consistency a little bit, but I'm back at it though. We back in here. You know what I'm saying?
Man.
But thank God for that. But anyway, man. So. For those before I move forward, again, congratulations on the graduating there, man. The master's program. You're a phenomenal mind, man, and I just appreciate what you do. So I just want to encourage you to keep going, brother, man. You definitely wanted to say that. And let it be known also for the viewers that MJ Jackson is probably the only person on the planet who never has to buy a book for any of the classes that he takes because he's already got them. He already owns them. I guarantee you, when this man gets the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, he's probably looking through, all right, got that. That one's on the way, got that. Like, this man has every book in print. You know what I mean? So he never has to worry about whether or not he has enough sources, man. He is the source right there.
Amen.
So.
That's the first question my wife asked you. How many other books do you have, brother?
You the living library, bro. That might be your nickname, the living library. You know what I'm saying? So
funny thing, I just bought 2 more books right before I got on here.
See, there we go. The book addiction is real, man. I just bought one yesterday, so it never ends. You know what I mean? All right, so we in here one more again, man. Y'all know what it is. We do like response videos, breakdowns, things of that nature. And I think we got a good one right here, man. We have a brother by the name of Coleman Hughes, who recently made an appearance on Sean McDowell's channel. And, they did like an interview, and it wasn't like a debate or anything like that. It was clearly just kind of a discussion where you could tell that the intent wasn't to, get in the kind of like a fisticuffs and a philosophical fisticuffs, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't intended to be that, but nevertheless, some interesting things came up, particularly in regard to atheism that we want to address here. And that being said, for people who don't know who Coleman Hughes is, he's I think we could describe him as being like a political pundit. He's got his blog and like a podcast and things of that nature. Obviously, he does. I believe he does some public speaking as well, primarily in regard to political issues, matters on race, justice, and so forth. I'm not sure if he would describe himself as being a conservative. I think he tends to garner support from that side of the political aisle. But nevertheless, one of the things I actually like Coleman Hughes, and one of the reasons is, he has shown in the past like a willingness to even go against the grain of his own fan base, if you will, for the sake of something that he believes to be true. And so I respect that about him. I actually like Coleman Hughes. Nevertheless, he was on Sean McDowell, and they covered a lot of different topics, among which were his take on some of the big questions about reality, life, the human experience, and so forth, getting into atheism, theism, and all that. So we kind of want to take a look at it and, just maybe take a stab at some of the comments he made and give some pushback, response, and so forth. So I think that kind of sums it up. Y'all have anything else that y'all want to say about that, or?
No, I will say, I guess I'll just say at the outset, so I don't forget that, I know Sean, I've been trained by Sean in part, and, I know he likes to create, and I respect this about him, that he likes to talk with people of different worldviews publicly and just have real, honest, and cordial conversations. So and that's kind of what this was. And I think there's an apologetic lesson that we can all take from that, regardless of what we do coming up, pushing back on Coleman's ideas.
No doubt. MJ, you want to say something? Or?
Yeah, I mean, like yourself, I respect this brother. I think he's a sharp thinker. Praying for him. Been following his work for like at least 4 years now, and I was excited when he came on to at least kind of sort of articulate his views regarding Christianity. So it was an opportunity to learn a little bit more about him.
Yeah, no doubt, man. So, and he was pretty blunt about the stuff that he holds to. It wasn't like a presentation or some sort of rigorous defense of his views or anything like that. But nevertheless, gives us kind of a window into it. And I think that the interview for me was interesting in so much as you saw the worldview, and we can really, at least in my estimation, we'll probably get into this, see how some of it plays out, even with practical things like, notions of justice and one's political lean and things like that. So let me go ahead and cue up the video. We'll take a look at this first part here, and you'll see what we got.
You also describe yourself as an atheist. I think a lot of my audience would be interested in just how you answer some of the big questions. For example, I realize this is a huge question, but having studied philosophy, you obviously thought about this a lot. The philosophical question, why is there something rather than nothing? As an atheist, how do you approach the question of the origin of the universe?
Yeah, so the answer to the question on its face, why is there something rather than nothing, is I have no idea.
Okay.
And it's a deep mystery that we may never solve, and we may in principle be unable to solve.
Okay.
Because I don't think that it has to be true that every answer is every question that we could pose is answerable by us, or that if we got the answer, we would understand it. Because I don't think humans occupy I don't think we're the most intelligent possible life forms. And if that's true, then it's probably true there's a lot of questions that we wouldn't even understand the answer to if we saw it. Like if you tried to explain calculus to a chimp, it's just there's no point, right? And there are probably things that are like calculus are to chimps to us, that we're never even gonna scratch the surface of, and that might be one of those questions, and the origin of consciousness might be another one of those questions. But as an atheist, I guess what I would say is I'm not sure how a religious person is or how God solves the mystery, right? Because it seems to just push the question back further, right? Like, is there, if God is the reason there's something rather than nothing, then I guess you could just change the question. The question effectively becomes, why is there a God rather than no God? Which then just becomes the analogous mystery for theists. So it's a mystery, and I'm not sure it really makes a difference whether you're an atheist or a religious person to how deep that mystery is.
All right. Coleman Hughes, round one. You know what I'm saying? Definitely want to get y'all's thoughts on that, but essentially, for those who may not be familiar with it, the question that Sean McDowell posed is this is kind of leads into what we might call the contingency argument. This notion of why is there something rather than nothing, which, shameless plug, happens to be one of the linchpin arguments that I that I frame my chapter on in this book right here, Urban Apologetics: Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel. In my chapter on Black atheism in the African American context, I dig into the argument from contingency, among other things. So I was definitely interested to hear his response, to this question right here. But before we get to that, what are you guys' impressions about the question and Coleman Hughes' response?
I don't think there's anything wrong with mysteries when the context permits them. I mean, after all, the Bible says that the hidden things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that he's revealed belong to us and our children. But at a certain point, me as a Christian, I'm perfectly satisfied with the fact, or better yet, I would be in what Dr. John Frame says, I'm at a cognitive rest in terms of seeing God as the creator and the sustainer of the universe. I don't have to keep seeking, hoping that somehow science figures it out. Because, once again, as we'll get into a little bit more, if we do an analysis, science studies the laws, causes and effects and things like that. But we're asking the question, what gave rise to those very things? What gave rise to time? What gave rise to space? What gave rise to matter? We're asking those questions. So you're going to have to also look at the tools that you're bringing to this question, and to simply say, well, what about God? Well, no disrespect to the brother, but Christians have answers for this, and we have good answers.
Amen.
Actually, I just want to second something you said. Maybe everybody, all the viewers may not have been following me all that long. I don't know. But one thing that I try to do on this show, it's not like a beat up session. You know what I'm saying? I don't just like, alley-oop atheists onto the show and just try to, slam dunk them on every point. Like, I try to find some sort of common ground, a point of agreement where I can. And I can appreciate, what he said about there being certain things that are in principle beyond our capacity to figure out. I actually think that that's true. Like, even as a Christian, I'm saying that. Yep. Now, obviously, for me as a theist, the most obvious example would be the fact that you have a God who is himself inexhaustible, right? So, in theory, or excuse me, in principle, rather, there are things about God that, is beyond my knowledge and probably beyond my capacity to know, you know what I'm saying? And there are probably things that he has done, or there are aspects of reality that are beyond my knowledge and beyond my capacity to know. And I'm comfortable with that. I like how you said it, MJ, that I'm at cognitive rest about that. That being said, even though I think that it's perfectly legitimate to have the epistemic humility to acknowledge that there are things that are outside of our knowledge and possibly and likely outside of our ability to know, I do think that one of the main functions of a worldview is to make sense of reality. It's to make sense of the human experience and reality as it actually is. And I think that when you're evaluating worldviews and you're comparing them one to another, or even just doing some self-evaluation about your own worldview, I think that a worldview that has more explanatory power and explanatory scope, we can talk about other criteria as well, but and a worldview that explains, let me put it this way: if worldview A explains more and explains more effectively a number of things about reality and the human experience than worldview B, then that counts in favor of worldview A. I'm saying if you have a worldview that does a better job of explaining things, explains them well, and explains a bunch more things than another worldview, then that's going to count in favor of that worldview. And so if, on Coleman Hughes' perspective, if he's left with this mystery that is unexplained and possibly unexplainable, and it so happens that theism can, give some explanation, can give ample explanation, and also can explain a number of other things, then I think that you're left with a situation where theism is now kind of ahead in the race, if you will. You know what I'm saying? If you have a competition between atheism and theism, then I would then put theism ahead in the sense that it's going to give me more explanatory power and explanatory scope. So I think when we're evaluating worldviews, explanations matter, and I think that the more things that a worldview explains, and the better a worldview is at explaining different phenomena in the universe, different aspects of the human experience and so forth, aspects of reality itself, then that's going to count in favor of that worldview. And so I just think that, this might be an open door, for Coleman Hughes. If he's really sincere about seeking truth and he finds himself with this mystery, then it might be of interest to him to pursue some explanations in this regard that theism has to offer, which we can get back to in a second. But Alex, what do you think,
man? Man, a lot of things. First, let me, like you said, find those points of agreement. And like you, I agree as well. I remember when Abdul Murray had said, if you can figure everything out about your God, that's not the God to worship. And this is for those who don't know, he was formerly a Muslim, since converted to Christianity, became one of the leading apologists in the world. But there should, I say it like this, and I don't know if these percentages are exact. That part doesn't really matter. But I would say, for me, I feel like I can get 80 or 85% home on God and Christianity as far as my objective assessment and belief in it, right? And I don't know if it's conservative or aggressive with that extra 15%. All I'm trying to say is that in most things in life, we don't require 100% certainty to go along with those things, or to affirm those things, or to believe those things, or to live out those things. Almost nothing in life has 100% certainty. We get married believing we're in love, believing that person loves you like you love them. But we also know the divorce rate is 50%. So like, sometimes things happen. And I'm not saying that's good or I co-sign that. I'm just saying, if somebody asks you on your wedding day, is it objectively true that she or he loves you? You'd say, yeah. Something happened. It wasn't objectively true, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
But my point in saying that is, just like you said, if you, let me see how I can say this. For somebody as brilliant as he is, I'll give him that. I don't think his answers match his intellect. Does that make sense? Like,
that's very interesting, man. Are you going to unpack that? I'm interested to see where you go with it. That's very interesting.
I think it's this, and I know we don't have time for this particular clip today, but I do encourage everybody to go back and watch the interview. But at one point, Sean asked him about Jesus or something like that, and he admitted, and I appreciate his admission, although I also have struggled with it. He said, I've actually never studied the historical Jesus. I struggle with, but you're so certain that Christianity is not true, or at least you're willing to stake your eternity on it. Whether you believe there is an eternity or not, you're still understand what's up for grabs if we're right. You know what I'm saying? I just think that's irresponsible. That if he was just some guy on the street you talk to, that's one thing. But if you were to study, he went to Columbia. If you're going to be this learned,
Columbia,
right, and this intelligent and thought through things this much and have this kind of platform, it behooves you to just at least do the research. Now, if you do the research and then come down on the side of Ehrman or Hitchens or whoever, okay, at least you tried, at least you looked into it. But it was funny because during the video, he kept saying things as questions or as thoughts he's had. And I'm like, man, this dude's clearly never read the Bible. Like every answer he was looking for is in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like like MJ said, I'm kind of hopeful because if these are your questions, oh, we're good, man. It's right there. You just got to go crack the book once in a while because you haven't done it yet.
But see, now that's an interesting point right there, though, because so let's say that well, I'll put it this way: I have not done research on every religion that has ever been, practiced on Earth, and I'm not, and I'm thinking like now we're in the past. I have also not done research on every religion that's being practiced in like every part of the world, right? Like who has, right? But at the same time, in any given culture, and I'm not going to say I'm coining the term, but it just kind of makes sense to me. In every culture, like some religions, ideas or whatever are in close social proximity to any given person who's in that society. Like so for example, if I were in Iraq, it probably wouldn't be too hard to find somebody who was a Muslim or to learn about Islam, right? It's pretty accessible. Mm-hmm. Likewise, here in the Christian world, maybe there's some exceptions, but generally speaking, I would think that information about Jesus, ideas about Jesus, in Christianity as a whole, it would be pretty accessible. Like it's not like hard to find, you know what I'm saying? So it's not like what you're suggesting is not like, him researching some obscure, cult on the other side of the world. Like it's not like we're talking about a worldview, belief system that's right there in your face, like 24/7 here in America. Like why, for somebody of his stature intellectually, and I do believe he's a very bright guy. I've listened to him. Like I said, I like Coleman Hughes, but it's just kind of odd. You're right. It is out of step, I think, with his level of intellect to not have investigated these things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was brought on the channel, and it was brought up that this is a taboo. Mm-hmm. Okay, so not only is it out of step with his intellect, this dude, he knows who Sean Curl is. He knows where Sean Curl stands.
Mm-hmm.
He's had atheists on the channel. He has Sam Harris on the channel, things like that. So he's not, he's not a joke or nothing like that.
No,
or a pushover.
Right.
But I mean, Sean, Dr. McDowell still brought up the fact that this is pretty taboo to be a black atheist.
Absolutely.
You talk about social proximity. Most of the black atheists that I hear about, some of them said they did some research. Some of them said,
mm-hmm.
But we'll see what else he has to say as well here.
Well, yeah, and I wanted to add something too. Is that it seems that again, actually, I'm gonna go back to Alice's point. Like, I don't have to know everything about a person or something to know something, if you will. You know what I'm saying? Like, it may be the case that I may not know everything about the universe's origins, but we can answer some questions. We can kind of go as far down the road as we possibly can, gain some knowledge. Even if we don't know it all. I'm saying we can be confident in what it is that we do know. And like I referred to earlier, and you said it earlier as well, MJ, like some of the stuff that he says, there are, answers abound in the Christian community, and among Christian philosophers to answer his questions. Like, so for example, like the whole, again, the contingency argument, I agree that it does seem, I don't even know if I use the word mysterious, but it's a big question. The issue of origins is a big question. But I think that logic can carry us a little ways, down the road to know some things about why there is something rather than nothing. As Leibniz, kind of breaks down, if you will, that, I think it's very plausible that there are certain things that exist based upon just the very nature of what they are. He refers to those things as necessary entities. And then there are certain things that don't exist within themselves for reasons that are within themselves, like a necessary entity, but are rather contingent, They're the kinds of things that could not exist. Like these are, two different categories that I think it's pretty plausible that things fall into it. And if you're trying to figure out, well, gee, if I'm looking around at all these different causes here in the natural order, all of which seem to be contingent, when I think about the universe as a whole, it could very well could have not existed, or it could very well have existed, very differently than what it does, what it currently does. I mean, it certainly seems like a contingent entity. What could be, an explanation for something like that? Well, if you have a necessary entity that has the capacities to bring about the universe as it is, then that gives us a stopping point of having to look for causes upon causes upon causes. That gives us a rational place to put a stopping point there and say, okay, well, if you have this necessary entity with those kind of capacities, yeah, that could be an explanation of why things exist, rather than nothing. And so, I mean, we could think about somebody like a Robert Coombs. We could think about a whole slew of people who have advanced, are still pushing that sort of argument. Josh Rasmussen and so forth, who've written very rigorously on this topic. Is it mysterious? I probably wouldn't use that word. Is it interesting? Is it a big question? Sure, but I do think that we have plausible ways to get from that question or that issue to a creator, is in God.
Yeah, and I can't remember how much of the clip you just played, so I don't want to go too far. But there's a consistent, well, let's just say with Coleman, a lot of the comments and thoughts and questions that he was interjecting or responding with, if it was somebody else, I'd say they're disingenuous. Because the reality is the comparison he made between the theists having the same obstacle as far as the beginning and the source and will kind of like who created God type question. Yeah, that's not true, bro. Like that's skepticism 101. And most junior apologists know, like, I got a book called Who Made God, and it's a book of 100. Yeah. So like in this book, but that's just the title, but it's 100 questions to the common, easy apologetic questions. And that's just one of them. Mm-hmm. I think they spend a whole page. That's it. Half a page. Like it's not difficult when you understand contingency and as I know he does. That's my struggle, because
right.
Every science science has shown there's a definite beginning. That's agreed upon at this point across Christian.
It's not controversial to say that, right? Yeah, it's not controversial.
The only question is this, and it's a very simple question. And the law of non-contradiction and the law of the excluded middle force us to pick one. Either something came from nothing or something came from someone. Those are the choices. I asked my 7-year-old, which one makes most sense to you?
Right.
Like, this is not rocket science. If you see a piece of paper and there's drawing on it, you could be nowhere in that room. You walk in that room, you see the drawing on the paper, you automatically assume a mind is behind that. Mm-hmm. You don't have to see it happen. That's an automatic and logical, rational conclusion.
Right.
So, like you said, teleology, if we look at all the totality of evidence and kind of a abductive approach, we're not looking at one thing. And I think sometimes atheists might think that we've got a 1,000-piece puzzle we put together, now that I got the 1,000-piece puzzle put together, even if I'm missing a couple pieces, I'm like, man, that looks like Jesus right there.
What's interesting, bro? You should say that, because, and I'm gonna go back to something you said a second ago, because one thing, people know I love philosophy. Like I read philosophy all the time. I enjoy it. It's like I'm a nerd like that. You know what I mean? And I appreciate rigorous thinkers. I appreciate people who can get into the weeds and just parse out anything. But at the same time, I also appreciate simplicity. I like rigor, but I also like you talking about with your daughter, like, yo, what just makes more sense? Like, at the end of the day, as I'm living life, as I'm looking at the world around me, I need to make sense of it. And sometimes people can find really sophisticated loopholes for what is something that's actually simple.
Yeah.
And we just don't have to do all that. Like, we can just look at it. So you said what?
Multiverse.
The multiverse, right? Exactly. it's super complicated. It's like, man, like it's like you're trying to use a sledgehammer to open a peanut. You know what I mean? Like we don't have to do that. And I'm not necessarily accusing Coleman Hughes of that, but to your point though, I do think that when he made that comment about, you know, theists having a similar, or I think he used the word analogous mystery, you know, if you just kind of, in his words, push it back a step and say, you know, kind of, you know, why is there a God, or however he framed it, it did come off to me as like the who made God comment. Like maybe it's a little bit more sophisticated, but it's essentially that's what it boils down to. And I'm like, well, first of all, again, going back to the contingency argument, and I think when I put this video out, maybe I'll just put it on the screen, but you know, one version of it, there's several different versions of it. Maybe some even stronger than the one I'm going to put on the screen, but essentially it's this notion that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either it's in its own nature or in some external explanation or cause. If the universe has an explanation for its existence, then that explanation is God. Step 3, the universe has an explanation. The universe exists, and then you get to the conclusion. Therefore, the explanation of the universe is God. And wrapped into that first premise is this notion of what I talked about earlier about you have these necessary and contingent entities. Now, I said that to say, if God is a necessary being, you know, a being that no matter how the world or reality fell together, you know, God is going to be there. That's one way to put it. In all possible worlds, you know, to be more particular, you know, God is going to be there. You know, that's one way of looking at it. Metaphysical necessity. If God is this necessary being, you know what I'm saying, like it's like he cannot not exist, and he has the capacity to bring about, you know, these effects, i.e., the universe, beings with consciousness, and so on and so forth. Then yeah, that affords a really good explanation. You know, like so if there's a question about, well, where is that, or why does that God exist? That God exists because he's a necessary being. He cannot not exist. That's the explanation. You know, in the same way that if somebody were to ask, well, why does 1 + 2 equal, 1 + 1 = 2? I'm saying it's of necessity that those quantities equal with the equal. I'm saying that's just the way the mathematics work, basic mathematics. You know, so those are necessary truths. I take moral truths to be necessary truths. Maybe we'll get back to that. But anyway, you know, it's a necessary truth that God exists. That's why there's a God. On the other hand, if you have this necessity in our framework, well, we do have an explanation there. But let's say we take God off the table and we're just looking at nature, you know, just the natural world, universe, however you want to frame it. And we're like, okay, well, why does the universe exist? Well, it just exists. It could not exist. It could exist differently, but it does. Like, it's just a brute fact that the universe exists. And we don't have an explanation. Well, again, if we have a necessary being over here, we have an explanation. The reason why it exists is because it's a necessary being. We have this brute universe that exists over here for which we don't have an explanation. These are not on par. There's not a tiebreaker needed here. I'm saying theism is going to be ahead in so much as we have an explanation as to why there's a God. And on the naturalist worldview, if this universe exists inexplicably, then we don't have an explanation, right? So it's a non-explanation versus explanation. They're not on par. So it's not true that, you know, you can just reverse the question and, you know, theism and atheism are neck and neck in terms of where they come out. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, man. That was really good. Yeah, no, I really like that. And I think the fully unpacked contingency argument of any version, most versions, it's hard to get away from, man. Like, because
I think so. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, even before the last 150 years, when they finally got, you know, Big Bang Theory and radiation afterglow and all the different discoveries, right? Even before that, even before we had scientific evidence that there was a singular beginning, philosophically, there was always reasons to believe it.
Sure.
Because logically, you can't get stuck in a state of infinite regression. There has to be a stop point, right? So if every day is yesterday, today never gets here. So we have to have a start, and we, you know, finishes we don't worry about, but we have to have a starting point at least. But that starting point, as MJ was saying about cause and effect at the beginning, that starting point is in and of itself the effect. That's, I think, some atheists, I don't know about Coleman on this particular issue, but some atheists either skip over that or ignore it. But
I don't know. Yeah, I don't
you know,
know,
like, if you have a beginning, or even I talked to my daughters. There was a point in time where you were born, or I should say conceived, and there was a point in time where you hadn't been conceived yet, but you have a starting point of your life.
Mhm.
Everything has a starting point, but we can't, as you just said, we can't say that about literally everything. We can only say about literally every contingent thing
Right.
or contingent being. But here's, because once again, just like I put that simple question, either something came from nothing, something came from someone. Same thing is the true case here. Atheistic scientists, Christian scientists have the same situation. We know that this is the beginning. What or who started it? The problem for the skeptic is whatever you put in that box is something.
It's got to be something.
It's got to be something. And the problem is you have to put nothing in that box if your worldview is true. And you can't do that. Like, to me, in my head, that's an atheistic worldview defeater. I know I'm not going to get rid of Sam Harris overnight, but to me, that one simple statement, you can't, I don't see an epistemic way past that. So I think it's I don't say troubling. It's disingenuous for some people. I don't know that he's being disingenuous, but I think he hasn't fully thought it through. And I think he said a couple other things about, I don't know if this was in this particular clip or the next one.
Oh yeah, I can play it. It's probably coming up in the next one. So if you want, I can play the next clip, and then we'll do it like that. My bad.
No, you're good. I just didn't want to go ahead.
It's probably the next one. Let me play it right quick. We'll see what's up.
Is there any evidence you've seen that gives you pause? And I ask because people like Christopher Hitchens, the late new atheist, I heard him, I can't remember if it was a debate or interview. Actually, it was an interview with Doug Wilson. He said it was the fine tuning of the universe where there's certain constants in physics that exist within a narrow range to allow life. Like, that gave him pause. And he thought that was a good argument. Didn't buy it, but it gave him pause. People like C.S. Lewis, former atheist, obviously became a Christian. It was things like music, and I know you describe your background in jazz, to him pointed towards something that was transcendent, that couldn't be captured in the physical. Is there anything about the theistic worldview that kind of gives you pause, or is it just you find no reason whatsoever to embrace it?
So I think two things give me pause in two different ways. One is in the psychological value of religion. Like, insofar as you believe every person has a soul, and everyone's soul is importantly connected to God, it's then very easy to believe very useful things in life, very pro-social, very warm, beautiful things, like everyone has good within them. Like, insofar as you get rid of all of the bits of religion that would cause a good person to act worse, such as the homophobic elements and the misogynistic elements of scripture, you get rid of those, and you just keep it to the core of everyone has an eternal soul, that you should do good when no one's watching. All of these things are very good ways to be, and it's difficult. I don't think secular culture has matched has sort of matched them with beliefs that would necessarily get you to act that way in every case. So that's one thing that gives me pause. Is it better to move through the world psychologically believing certain aspects of religion?
Okay.
So he's there's actually a two-part answer that he's given to the question of what gives him pause, and that was the first half. And I'll play the second one in just a second in regard to consciousness. He's about to get into that. But before we do that, you guys want to say anything about what he just said there? Or?
Yeah, and actually, I think the other thing I was going to say was on the first clip, so I'll say that real quick and let MJ go. Because he was on was it the first clip? He was talking about I don't think we're the most intelligent life form, and
oh yeah, he did say that, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just wanted to address that. He said we're never going to even scratch the surface of our understanding of this or that. So I just want to offer a couple thoughts for everybody. the fact that him and Sean are able to have that conversation disproves the point that humans are not the most intelligent life forms. Now, you know, some people could disagree with that. They could say those two brothers aren't even intelligent. So let me just offer, and I'm not saying that. Let me be clear. Here's some thoughts to consider. What other species on the planet talks about, debates the role that it plays as a species on Earth? What other species besides us does that? Right? What other species on Earth can, if they choose to, direct the environment, the food quality, the safety, the messaging regarding every other species and every other thing on the planet except humans? Who else can do that? Human exceptionalism, in my estimation, is a fact, whether people want to admit it or not. And I think a lot of people who don't co-sign it do so because they know that it's a problem for their worldview as opposed to an actual problem. But I think it's a little bit of capping going on. So it's a fact. And in fact, it's so strong and so pervasive that to ignore or minimize the reality of human exceptionalism, to ignore that or minimize that fact, it actually puts everyone and everything on Earth at greater risk. Now, I know later he's going to talk about human flourishing, and I know we'll have a long discussion on that. But we need Chris up in here.
yeah. CBS in the building.
But that aside, he violated his own assumption by answering the question. There's a guy, a scientist, he works with the Discovery Institute, Intelligent Design Institute. Now, for those who don't know, Discovery Institute is predominantly a Christian scientific organization, but you don't have to be a Christian to be a part. You just have to affirm in some way, shape, or form with intelligent design, or do research to that effect. And there's one guy who's not. I think he's agnostic, but he basically, several shows I've seen him on, he's like, I don't know what's true, but I'm positive Darwinism isn't. Like there's no way. And this is from a science. So we don't have time to get into probably the whole evolution thing, but I'm just trying to push back and say it doesn't actually benefit us to deny human exceptionalism, because then what difference does it make about our moral views anyway? What difference does it make about anything we think? What difference does it make what a dolphin thinks? And those are one of the smartest animals that does exist. Yet a dolphin cannot exit its own environment. There's something called goal directedness. And so part of the reasons for me, when I really dug in about Darwinism, macroevolutionary theory, is body plans and body types are secure. Michael Behe and what's the other guy's name? Stephen Meyer and other people, they've done a lot of work on the fact that species do not seem to have the capacity to exit their body plan. Does that make sense? Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin Devolves, and he talks about, when you look at the 8-part, that thing we learned in science class, kingdom, let me see if I can do it. Kingdom, phylum,
genus,
class, family, order, genus, species, or something like that. There's 8 of them. Bottom line is this: scientists of all stripes have shown that species do not have the capacity to exit the species level. That's in the book, he does it like dollars and cents. So there's 8 digits. So 6 on this side of the decimal, 2 on this side. Basically, everything has to stay on the cents column. That means macroevolutionary is a scientific impossibility.
Interesting.
Now, I know everybody's not going to agree with that, but regardless of if you do or don't, is not really the point here. The point is this: I've talked to astrophysicists, biochemists, physicists, particle physicists, everybody, philosophers, archaeologists, experts in their field. They've read and this is both Christian and atheistic. There's a lot of information they agree on, and all of it co-signs the things I'm saying. So I want people to understand, I'm not just saying this because, you're a Christian, you got to say, no. Like, I read the data and I'm like, oh man, this just gives me more awe for God. But that's another point. All of the information that they agree upon points to a singular point of beginning for the universe, right? So I'm like, there's so many points of agreement that if we just go with those, I think he'd have to double down on some wrong conclusions, or he'd have to change his mind for the better, for the glory, for the gospel. And that's a great thing. But for anyone listening, if you think it's a kind of a humble position to have this view that human exceptionalism is not a reality, if the world adopted that mindset, the world would come to an end a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
We are now biblically, once again, the Bible answers all this. The Bible says we are stewards of the earth. We are ambassadors. We are
right.
Like that makes sense now. Oh, wait. Okay. The very first thing God did when he created human beings, he gave them dominion. He told them
a job.
Right. Like it makes perfect sense in a Christian worldview that, okay, well, if we're the top, we should look after everybody else. I don't make my kids raise me. Like if we're at the top, we got to take care of everybody. Now, I believe humans have done a terrible job of it, but that doesn't change the fact that we're the best ones to do it.
No doubt. Right.
We're the only ones that can do it. And so I think those are some things that, like, I'm not going to say that's going to make somebody become a Christian overnight. And maybe it will. If it does, to God be the glory. But even if it doesn't, those are questions I think it would behoove everybody to wrestle with.
Because, and actually that's important. That's important because it's interesting enough. Typically, when I've dealt with atheists, I'm saying, who are like really, kind of like the evangelistic type of atheists, I'm saying, like, they often like will trumpet human exceptionalism, you know what I'm saying, particularly in regard to the sciences. They'll talk about, oh, we've discovered this and we can do that. Science has made such great strides. And so they actually usually will in a sense kind of put on a pedestal the cognitive faculties of the human race and what we've been able to accomplish, medicine and so forth. So I think it's very interesting that he's kind of taken a different route to that. That being said, I think he said something to the effect of, like, we're not the most, I guess, the smartest entities that could possibly be, or something like that, he said. Mm-hmm. But what I think was interesting, though, is that if you're going to acknowledge limitations to what we can know, at what point do you, what's the cutoff?
That's good.
So in other words, he's going to say we can't know things like the origin question. Like, that may be at least possibly in principle beyond our ability to know. But I'm thinking about things that, like, he cares about, for example, matters about justice, like how society should be ordered, if you will. Questions that ultimately have like a moral root. Like, why put those things in the box of things that we can really know and have real answers about? I think that actually, from a theistic standpoint, it could very well be that the kinds of answers that he's looking for, or would want to advance in the public square when it comes to matters about justice, when it comes to about who should be doing what's fair, what's not fair, I actually think that those questions are beyond our human, abilities if left to ourselves. And I say that because man is sinful. Like, he says something to the effect of, if a religion causes somebody to be worse, a good person to be worse than they otherwise would be, I think there's an assumption there that indeed that there are good people, and I push against that. I think that human history has proven otherwise. I think that our everyday lives prove otherwise. We aren't very good standards of morality, and nor are we good stewards of our moral experiences if left to ourselves. And so I think that when it comes to the issues that he wants to deal with, that are at least in some sense tied to morality in some way or another, I think that he should probably feel very pessimistic about our ability to rationally come to right conclusions about them, and certainly to act them out or live them out. And this is a beef that I have with atheism. I'm going to put all my cards on the table as somebody obviously I'm an African American, and I want to see African Americans do well. Like, I want to see all Americans do well. You know what I'm saying? But when I look at my immediate community, and in terms of my immediate realm of influence, right, I want to have an impact on the world. And when I look at my community, there are ideas that really are of no use to the Black community in terms of getting us in a position where we can thrive and be in a better position than we are now. And I think atheism is like that. I think it's of no use in the sense that, the man just said that he doesn't believe that the secular world has come up with a good grounding, if you will, or source of things like morality.
Yet he's willing to trust it.
Yeah, he's willing to trust it, right? You know, I mean, human value, why we should value one another. He doesn't believe that secularism has come up with a good basis for those kinds of things. I'm like, well, those are all the kinds of things that we need to, as a foundational springboard to jump off as an African American community to propel ourselves toward human flourishing. Like, we need a firm basis for human value. And if you're telling me that the secularism or whatever, how we frame it, can't give me that, then that worldview is of no use to my community. I'll end it with this. If, again, coming back to worldviews, another means to evaluate a worldview is livability. If you can't live the worldview out, then that's a red flag that there's something wrong with the worldview. If I keep, appealing to notions of justice, human value, fairness, and so on and so forth, and those concepts can't be situated within my worldview, and I have to keep borrowing from somebody else, then that's a flag, that's a red flag that there's something deficient about my worldview. And so, in so much as, to his own admission, Coleman Hughes acknowledges that there are these deficits in terms of what the secular worldview can offer, or secularist perspective, however you frame that, can offer with respect to some of these foundational aspects of reality and the human experience. I would say, hey, ding, 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 that's a red flag that you probably need to do some, kind of go back to the drawing board, if you will, and really consider this atheistic worldview that you've been holding to. But MJ, I'm sorry, you was about to say something?
I would like to just piggyback on everything that you just said. I mean, as you was talking, and as we started this conversation, within worldview evaluation, at least how I was taught, that there are 3 tests that a worldview, if it's going to be a good worldview, must pass. It must pass the test of reason, and that is the worldview coherent? Are there some logical contradictions and things like that within the worldview? It must pass the test of experience. Well, something coming from nothing is an abject failure of the test of experience, because philosophically speaking, is bankrupt, and then the sciences just fell into line, demonstrating that we do have an absolute definite beginning, and rather than come to grips that requires a personal cause, what we have seen is the secular crowd and the humanist and atheist crowd try to kick the can down the road by positing a multiverse or more mechanistic causes, or however you want to put it. And then, of course, what you just said, the test of practice. Can I live this thing out in practice? And no.
And let me just prove your point, MJ, because I was just looking this up real quick as you were talking, as Adam was talking. Fascism and communism, both of which are atheistic ideologies, murdered more than 150 million people in the 20th century alone. Even if we combined the Crusades, which I don't co-sign, none of us are co-signing. We're not saying that every Christian has always been good and never evil. We're not saying that. Although most of those people in the Crusades were soldiers. So I want to throw that out. Even throw in all of the Muslim violence, put it together. It still pales into comparison what 1 century of atheistic living. You talk about, can you live it out? When these things were fully lived out by the people leading these regimes to the conclusions, the logical conclusions, although they're not desirable, even for atheists. I don't think Coleman Hughes would say what Pol Pot did or Mao Zedong, these are desirable, or these are even things he would consider. I'm not saying that, but that's not the point. When we're examining worldviews, the personal nature gets taken out of it. Who I am doesn't matter if Christianity is true. It's true based on those tests that Matt just elaborated. We can talk about coherence theory and correspond. So when we put all those tests out there, and it's actually atheists who are telling us, some atheists who are telling us, I don't believe in God, but I also am not going to pretend like my lack of belief in God or God's lack of existence is going to be good for us.
Right.
And Nietzsche is probably the one that comes to mind, but there's others, David Hume and others, that they're not Dawkins. They're not comfortable with not being able to ground morality, which I know we'll talk about in a second, or even consciousness.
Right.
They're simply saying it is what it is. Look both ways. You know what I'm saying? Keep your head on the swivel.
Right, basically. But no, I mean, but that's a good point though, because and I think about I kind of got a hint from Coleman Hughes that like he, in a sense, downplayed some of the stuff that he was saying. Like these are not just like warm, fuzzy ideas that it's nice to believe if you're a theist. Like we're really talking about some fundamentals to law, fundamentals to justice, fundamentals to what does it mean to be human and how do we interact with one another? Like these things are consequential in terms of how we live individually and as a society. So this isn't just like kind of fluffy, oh, it's just nice to believe that people have value. Well, no, how you answer that question is very weighty in terms of how we live. And literally, Coleman Hughes' whole platform is built around engaging those kinds of issues, and the underpinnings of them all relate back to these issues that he says that secularism has not provided, and I don't know if he said has not or cannot provide a sound foundation for. But let me get to his next point, because I think we're going to be able to drive a little bit of that home and well, a couple clips from now. But I want to get to the second part of what he said gives him pause. We can do that.
And then I guess a mystery that gives me pause is why there's consciousness at all. And by consciousness, I mean the feeling of what it's like, the feeling that it's like something to be this body, right? That there's a perspective it's like from the inside, is something that science has no explanation for, I think. Because you can perfectly well, scientifically, you can imagine all the machinery of a human body from the atoms on up working perfectly well like a machine. And you can understand why everything happens, starting with physics. You can understand it at the level of biology. You can understand it at the level of chemistry. But nowhere in any of those sciences is there a law that suggests when all of this comes together, it's going to feel like something to be that hunk of atoms. Right? There's going to be a subjective first-person experience. There's nothing in physics or biology that really explains why, given that the same atoms inside me are inside like hunks of, are inside stars and just inanimate objects, why there's something it's like to be this hunk of atoms as opposed to a lifeless hunk of atoms. So that's a deep mystery that has not it's not even close to being explained by anything in science. And again, I might put it in the category of mysteries we won't ever understand and can't understand in principle.
That's really interesting, that the origin of the universe is a mystery, and also the origin of consciousness. As a Christian apologist, it probably wouldn't surprise you that I think there's a good plausible explanation for these within the theistic worldview. But that's something we could come back to. I appreciate that honest response from you. Is oftentimes, as you know, I'm sure you've...
All right. So, you know, of the second aspect of, or the second, I think he calls it a mystery that puzzles him or gives him pause about his atheistic perspective or worldview, consciousness, you know, the emergence of consciousness. And I'm telling you, man, like, you know, I mean, I know he's atheist at all, but man, I like Coleman Hughes, man. I mean, aside from the fact that we share a name, Adam Coleman Hughes. I mean, aside from that, you know what I mean? I like this guy. You know, it's very honest, and you can tell that the brother's been studying, because he described, you know, the problem of consciousness, if you will, the hard problem of consciousness, in a way that kind of lets you know that he's been studying up on this, and I can appreciate that, man. He's not standing still intellectually. He's out there digging in and chewing on some deep stuff. So, yo, what do y'all think about that? His perspective, or him bringing up consciousness, and what you got, MJ?
I like the fact that he didn't try to punt to this being as some emergent property
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And normally that's the response that we hear. Well, this is emergent property of the brain. But he stood there flat-footed and said, "Hey, we still got to ask the question that if that's a pile of, you know, material or matter or atoms or whatever you want to call it over there, this still doesn't explain why this pile of atoms or material right here has consciousness. It doesn't explain it." And simply attempting to, once again, and he said it himself, look for a mechanistic process doesn't cut it. You have to be willing to at least commit to reason.
Mm-hmm.
And follow the evidence, and at least abductively. From nothing can come. Okay.
Ex nihilo, ex nihilo.
Yeah.
So from no personality cannot give rise to personality.
Mm-hmm.
That is a metaphysical principle, and I think he's struggling with it.
It's going to be a struggle.
That's a tough one, man. I mean, you know, yeah, go ahead.
It's tough for him. I mean, it's not
right.
It's tough for that worldview. And you said something, I mean, Adam, I don't know, in your last segment you were talking, but you said, I forget, you said metaphysical necessity. I think you said it was your.
Yeah, I was talking about metaphysical necessity.
Yeah,
and,
man.
you know, yeah,
I'm still in that, by the way.
Oh, okay.
But I like how you said it, because once again, let's line everything up for everybody. So naturalism or materialism, or, you know, I guess there's slight differences, but let's say naturalism. That's most likely akin with atheism. And we have, at least, we don't deny naturalism, but we just add supernatural, and that would be where we are. Once you say metaphysical, so we can talk about metaphysical realities, and atheists can talk about metaphysical realities. But as we'll talk about with the morality issue, it's the same issue of how do you ground those metaphysical realities? When I see, you know, all the signs around town, love is love, and this and that. If you ask the average person on the street, define the word love, what would they say? Could they answer the question? Can you tell me in an ontological sense what love is? I'm not saying you, but like the average person. So we say stuff all the time. People, Coleman, everyone, we say stuff all the time. We have absolutely no idea really in an essential way what we're talking about. When I say something is good, as we'll talk about in a second, I mean a certain thing. When I say something's evil, I mean a certain thing. Now, somebody can disagree with what I mean, but all I'm saying is I can ground what I mean. Whether or not you can ground what you mean, that's your issue.
Right.
You know, but
yeah, that's your job, right?
Like you said, Adam, if you can't ground multiple things in your worldview, you might need another worldview.
Yeah.
And not just multiple things, like big things like morality.
Morality is pretty big.
You know?
Personality, or we might use the same term, you know, rationality, you know, as Emily is pointing to, that's kind of a big deal.
It's kind of a big deal. So I was
that wasn't that COVID, was it?
No, bro.
I'm playing.
Nah, so I've done my channel is called Relentless Pursuit of Purpose. I do a lot of work in writing on purpose and on meaning, and I'm bringing that up because those things are connected to the fact that, as Coleman rightly said, I believe every person is unique, and I believe everyone has a unique purpose for that reason. Now, how I talk about it, have y'all seen how people on my channel seen me talk about it? It's not like the self-help type of way, but I believe there's a way to ground purpose, right? We're talking about grounding. So part of that would have to necessitate as a prerequisite, I guess, or something from which this fact is contingent, that every person is individually a unique individual person. That has to be true in order for every person to have, right? Like one has to come before the other. I tell people God can do more with 4 letters than we can do with 26. When you look at DNA and there's those 4 things that make up the genetic alphabet, you got DNA, I got DNA, but we look different. You know what I'm saying? Like only God could mastermind that. Nature can't. And so this is a huge problem. So for me, one way that I've been, I think on your channel, even we talked about what does it mean to be human, and I gave a talk at Reason to Believe. But part of it is, what is it to be human?
Yeah.
before we talk about what it means, like what is it?
Like,
What is the difference between me as a organic life form and a dog? We both pump blood, we both have a brain. So, but is there a unique? And so now we come back to the human exceptionalism. So I think there has to be a difference, because we're even to have the discussion about it. So then I got to come back to some of these things and actually realize he raised more questions than he answers, and that's the part I don't know. So here he said the psychological value of religion.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, every religion is not the same. Every religion is not even believing in a soul. So
True, yeah.
That Confucianism doesn't believe in a soul. So we can't. So this idea, and that brings me to my second thing. He commits the fallacy of equivocation, because what he means by religion is not what we mean by Christianity. And he's trying to court, you know what I'm saying? Like he's trying to conflate, and I get it. If you haven't studied historical Jesus, then you don't know what we believe. So, you know, it makes sense. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't make it right. He's conflating that. And so the fallacy of equivocation, for those that don't know, occurs when a term or phrase in an argument is used in an ambiguous way, either intentionally or unintentionally, with one meaning in one portion of the sentence and another meaning of the same word in another portion of the sentence. And so when I say to Adam, hey man, I'm struggling in my Christian walk, Adam knows what I mean. Right. Adam's been a minute. Matt knows what I mean. Like there's certain things we could say in a certain environment of people who understand the context that I don't have to explain myself. But him saying what he said on Sean's podcast, he does need to explain further. And I'm sure other places maybe he did. When you say religion, what are you talking about? It's the whole tactics thing. Like, what do you mean by that?
That's a good question, right? Yeah. What is he referring to there? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so those two things, you know, we're not going to get an answer, but those are things people need to consider. Then he said, get rid of those bits of religion that cause a good person to act worse. Once again, how do you define good? We'll get to that in a second. But he said something at the beginning, and I don't know, I think when you were introducing Adam, you're talking about, and this doesn't matter if he's more conservative or not, that part's not important, but he did, in his example of good people, is be less homophobic or something to that effect.
Yeah, he did say that. Yeah, right.
So like, now you're on both sides of the fence again.
Right.
Liberal, conservative. And I'm not saying he has to be one or the other. I really don't care. I'm just saying, I even heard Dawkins say some stuff. When you talk about human flourishing, which he'll talk about in a second, how does homosexuality align with that?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Yeah.
How does that lifestyle cause humans to flourish, as in grow or increase? And I'm not saying this is why you should be against it. I'm just saying if Coleman believes Coleman and you believe what you just said, then you should be against this. I'm not saying I'm against. I'm just saying you should be against it based on what you said, but they won't. They don't keep that same energy, right? So they make exceptions, and I say they. Now I'm speaking more broadly. Atheists don't make exceptions here and not here, and make exceptions. But that's what always has to happen when morality is not objective. You have to make exceptions based on what you like, and at that point, we're in an unlivable situation. So two more things, and I'll be done. So everybody, this is from a book. Excerpt from a book called Canceled Science by Eric Hidden. I believe he is actually part of Reasons to Believe. In the book, there's one excerpt here that says, according to modern evolutionary theory, chance in tandem with nature's laws are said to have assembled countless millions of atoms into phenomenally complex organic molecules and further organized these to possess all the properties of life. And then, having accomplished this, the same laws of nature are credited with causing countless specific readjustments of those molecules into more and more complex forms. At some point, these complex combinations of atoms formed into trillions of cells, becoming a self-aware being who then attempted to explain its own origin by appealing to unguided chance. That's modern evolutionary naturalism in a nutshell. So I read that because it'll encapsulate real quick. This is the problem. Right? Like that's the problem. And so not only is he saying my worldview doesn't have good answers, he's saying that I'm willing to live with the bad answers that we have rather than look for good answers.
Hey, this is the best we got, so we got to roll with it. Yeah.
And that's just a logically inconsistent statement. So he said this perspective from inside. What would you? He said, what would be inside you? That is, or I'm saying, what would be inside you that's able to have a perspective? In other words, whatever that thing is that inside him that is having the perspective of being him, his consciousness, it has to be an immaterial reality. So, just forget the Christianity, atheism for a second. If I lay all the evidence on the table, I remember talking with Hugh Ross about this, who's astrophysicist, came to faith. Yeah, came to faith in Christ by doing astrophysics. He was an atheist when he went to college. So if I lay all the evidence on the table, I will ask the question, who did this? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if you show all the moral evidence in the universe beginning, like if you lay all the quote unquote evidence on the table, my first question, having never heard the word God in my life, would be, who did this? In other words, it's a natural conclusion based on the evidence. We're not simply trying to fit evidence into a Christian worldview. And that's why it's also troubling that maybe some of the stuff he's not even aware of, because he's very certain about his position. The last thing I'll say is this: what is it like to be this hunk of atoms? He says, and so he raised great questions and thoughts, and if you keep all his questions, if I made a list of his questions and hand him a Bible, I'm like, bro, if you take your questions with this book, you're
gonna be all right, bro.
You're gonna be all right. But answers that inform our personhood, our purpose, the meaning of life, why humans are exceptional, why we have consciousness, or at least how we have it. Like, these are fundamental questions, and Scripture answers all of them. So,
no, it's good, man. And here's the thing: it's like, coming back to some, I think that last point you made. Well, let me put it this way. I kind of use like an analogy. Imagine if you have two sprinters who are, let's say they're in the Olympics and they're doing like the hurdles. You know what I'm saying? They're doing like a 40-yard hurdle or whatever, right? And so one of those sprinters representing theism, the other one representing atheism. All right, that's kind of how I see it in my head. So, each one of those hurdles represents some sort of philosophical issue, some sort of, aspect of reality that needs to be explained. What I'm seeing is that, but by, Coleman Hughes' estimation, there's some hurdles there that it doesn't seem that atheism is able to cross well, with respect to the groundings of things like human value and what he talked about, like what he attributed to theism as being, he didn't use the word war of fuzzies, but things that are good to believe, or something like that. He said, there are these things that can't be grounded in secularism, like along those lines, or consciousness. I'm saying, like, he doesn't seem that he hasn't found some sort of solid explanation as to the appearance of consciousness, here in the world, the fact that we indeed are conscious beings, and so forth. And so, like, each one of those issues is like another hurdle that atheism is struggling to cross, if it crosses it at all. And I'm arguing that theism is hopping these hurdles like a mug. Like, we good over here. Like, we clearing these hurdles, no stumbles, no nothing, right? And so, just like in a real race, I'm saying, if you have somebody stumbling over hurdles versus somebody who's clearing them straight out, then the person who's clearing them is going to win the race. And that's what I'm saying, that if you have this race, between the theistic worldview and atheistic worldview, atheism is hitting too many of these hurdles. And I think you find it again with consciousness. I like the fact that he said that with respect to science hasn't given us an ample explanation as to how consciousness came about or why we're conscious, so on and so forth. I can appreciate that, and I agree with him. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read this quote right quick. Actually, in my chapter on Black atheism, I was explaining there's actually a 17th century philosopher by the name of Zarayaku who raised the same question back in the 17th century about, why is it that I'm conscious, that I'm a rational being? And I kind of just, rehabbed his argument a little bit, or, spoke to it a bit. And in the midst of doing that, I quoted Thomas Nagel. Actually, I got his book right here. Thomas Nagel is an atheistic philosopher who wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos, where he's an atheist, and he's dealing with the problem of consciousness, if you will. And he says, quote, the existence of consciousness seems to imply that the physical description of the universe, in spite of its richness and explanatory power, is only part of the truth, end quote. And essentially that's what Coleman Hughes is describing. He's right. Like we can take a look at from atoms on up. We can understand the human body, including the brain, in terms of how this piece, this physical piece over here, is interacting with this one. I mean, we know a lot of things about it from the bottom up. But nevertheless, even having a full description of what's going on in the mind, the brain, and the rest of the body, we still have no clue. Just on that alone, it still doesn't bring us to, well, how is there this first person perspective? Like how do the pushes and pulls of the physical that's going on in the physical body and in the brain give rise to a first person experience? Now, he didn't use this term, but I could tell by the way he described it, he's obviously done some reading on this notion of qualia. This notion that there is a what it is like to be Adam Coleman. What is it like to be in this physical body of mine? There's a what it is like to be Alex McElroy that I can't know anything about unless I ask Alex. I can't know anything. I can't know what it's like to be MJ unless I ask MJ. I'm relying upon his report, right? But I can't know from looking at his brain and so on and so forth the what it is like aspect of what it's like to be MJ. And I think it's interesting because he's clearly aware of these things, which I think is pretty dope. And as Sean McDowell mentioned, hey, we got some explanations over here. When it comes to the origins of the universe, when it comes to consciousness, as Matt pointed out, I think a little while ago, in our worldview, consciousness is native to the theistic framework, right? We begin with a conscious being. So we're not relying upon physical processes kind of lucking up and coming up with consciousness way later down the road and trying to fit it into our worldview that way. Actually, this notion of personality is native to the theistic worldview. So we've got a head start conceptually in terms of what's in our framework to explain what brings about consciousness. And likewise, we're kind of piggybacking on that rather. And actually, I got this from Josh Rasmussen. He has a great book. I think it's called Reasoning, a Bridge of Reason or something like that, from Reason to God or something. Josh Rasmussen. Yeah, it's a great book.
That's the one with the staircase on the front?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Josh Rasmussen. It's a great book. And he talks about how when we're looking at the cause of the universe and we think about the kind of power that it would take to bring about the universe that we currently inhabit, those powers aren't merely powers to bring about physical effect. But in so much as we are cognitive beings, you have to have cognitive powers. You know what I'm saying? You have to have the kind of capacity, by power I mean the capacity to bring about a result. You have to be able to bring about, conscious beings. And if you have a conscious being that happens to be, this necessary being who's the cause of all things, then yeah, you've got a ready-made explanation. And it's not ad hoc. Like this is, we have independent reasons for affirming that. So we're kind of getting ahead. We've got this head start on the atheistic worldview in terms of how we can explain consciousness. So I thought it was very interesting that he brought that up. And unfortunately, I think that in so much as I agree with him that science, can't really provide an answer. So he would have to maybe he explores panpsychism. Maybe he'll go that more metaphysical route. I don't know, but nevertheless, I do think that there are other problems, that come about and are implied by this big question mark in his worldview about consciousness. Because if you can't give an account of consciousness, then reasoning goes out the window. And like our ability to reason can't be grounded in that worldview. If you kick consciousness out the picture, say you got this big question mark. So again, we're thinking about worldviews, explanatory power. Actually more so in this instance of explanatory scope. It seems to me that reasoning and consciousness are outside the scope of naturalism, as according to Coleman Hughes, or at least he doesn't have an explanation for it. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of hurdles that we're not clearing here, for atheism. You know what I'm saying?
And I'm gonna recommend a book to him and to anyone else listening if they're struggling with any of the things Adam just said, which is by Frank Turek, and it's called "Stealing from God: Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case." Now, every chapter is based on an acronym CRIMES, and some of the CRIMES, but one is I think intelligence, it's information. One is causation. So these are in this book, as opposed to I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I think he deals with more of those metaphysical realities that Adam's talking about, and speaks to the fact that Like I say, it's not that atheists don't have good answers to questions. They can't even justify asking the question. Like that's like we're putting the cart before the horse. For him to even speak about consciousness, he's already exited his worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Like we
seem to
missed
fit to
that.
me.
You know,
I mean, that's very true. I mean, and because the reality is, if you're left with just the natural world, which I don't know if he would take himself to be a naturalist, because maybe you can frame that differently than straight up atheism. But if all we're left with is the natural world and the physical constituents of the brain, like it's just basically bumping about, for reasons that go all the way back to the first moment of we'll call it creation, or the first moment of the universe. We'll just call it that way. And like kind of like domino like fashion, everything just kind of is determined physically, including the goings on in my brain. Then there's just really no reason to be confident, that I'm reasoning. I'm saying it is basically my brain is doing what it does. Or even if you want to appeal to evolution is not necessarily equipped or I would say a good explanation to account for reasoning, because evolution is gearing towards survival. And we can certainly survive without the kind of rational faculties that we have. We could have just enough reasoning ability to not go extinct, but there's no reason to think that evolution would yield the kind of beings that can figure out quantum mechanics and things like that. Like why think that? And even like I agree with Matt, like when it comes to emergentism, which is just a label that they kind of slap on something. But some people would argue that our reasoning is kind of like you have H2O, like hydrogen and oxygen are what they are, but then you put them together, you have water, and it's wet and things like that. So that's kind of how consciousness is. But I don't think that works, because quite frankly, when you look at it, it's like apples and oranges. Like H2O, when you combine it, that wetness, you can call it viscosity. It's a physical property. You know what I'm saying? But the qualia, you can touch it, right? Again, you're relying on experience, which is that that qualia that is totally unlike anything that's like a physical property. It's qualia is not a physical property, and so that's just not even a good analogy. So I said to say, everywhere you go, I know we got to get to our last clip here, but everywhere you go, it seems that he's coming up short here on some explanations. You know what I mean? And that's not a jab. I'm just like, man, hey, some red flags here, brother. You know what I mean? We're praying for you. You say, hey, come on home, Coleman. You say, come on home.
Amen.
Let me play this last clip, and then we'll get up out of here.
A ton of classes on philosophy that intersect with religion and metaphysics. One of the big questions is where morality comes from. And I could simply ask you, do you believe in objective morality? On an atheist, how do you ground this? But I want to kind of approach it through the back door and ask the question, why would something like racism be wrong on an atheist worldview? Now, before you answer that, I want to make sure nobody hears me saying that I think atheists are more racist. Not my point whatsoever. You and I are talking about what's called the grounding problem. Where does right and wrong come from? Does it actually exist? Do we have moral values and duties, etc.? So that's the question I'm getting at through the lens of kind of race. So I guess as a Christian theist, I'd answer this by saying God made us in his image. We all have value, and we're called to love one another. And racism is an act of impartiality, mistreating somebody that we shouldn't treat that way. That would be like a quick Christian theist response to why racism would be wrong. And I realize that raises a ton of other questions, but how would you approach and answer that as an atheist?
Yeah, so I guess a couple ways. One would be that ultimately, as an atheist, I ground questions of right and wrong in the notion of human suffering and human flourishing, which I think are concepts you don't need God or religion to understand the general shape of and to be motivated by. So that's where I would, what's good is what increases human flourishing, and what's bad is what decreases it, what increases suffering. And broadly speaking, racism increases suffering, and it definitely in the long run. And when it comes to what is the reason we should treat people the same, well, scientifically, we are all of the same species, right? There was people didn't understand this for a long time. They actually thought people of different races were literally came from different branches of the evolutionary tree. But we understand that to be untrue right now, and it's illogical to treat people differently because of their skin color, and it's immoral because you are increasing the sum of human suffering in the world by mistreating someone for bad reasons.
Where does my obligation come from to care about your flourishing or somebody else in a universe without God?
So where does your obligation to care about my suffering come in?
Yeah, or somebody else's. Is there actually an objective moral obligation to care about human flourishing? If somebody decided they want to be like Machiavelli and the Prince and just kind of deceive for personal gain, what obligation is that person breaking?
So I think the word obligation is confusing me a little here, because at face value there is none, right? As an atheist, an obligation literally is, it kind of implies somebody out there making you do it or telling you you had to do it, but there's no one out there that is going to tell you you had to, save the drowning baby that you're, walking past rather than get your shoes wet, even if it means getting your shoes wet, right? There's no one in the universe, I think, that is going to tell you you have to do that because I told you it's your duty. Nevertheless, I think we have a duty to our fellow human beings and animals, because we know that they're capable of suffering just like we are, and that if it's in our power to help, we absolutely should do that. If should means anything, we should do what's in our power to help the people around us. And I do think this, it comes down to a rule that is in Christianity as well as Buddhism and other places, that you understand that people are similar to you and you want to treat them how you would want to be treated.
Well, moral philosophy from your boy Coleman Hughes.
That's what you call it.
What do y'all think, man? I'm gonna let y'all roll with it. What you got?
I'm gonna let MJ go first.
That dude bit the bullet, didn't he? He was like, there is no obligation. You don't have to. But I mean, moral values serve as a fundamental and important part of human life. Each and every person experienced that tug and pull, at least intuitively, of moral obligations. It's almost like we're hardwired to live that way. This sense of moral oughtness, you see how he tried to find a prescription for it and tried to prescribe it within human suffering and human flourishing.
Yeah.
But once again, okay, sounds arbitrary. It sounds very arbitrary, and what would prevent your suffering increasing my flourishing?
Mm-hmm.
How about so once again we can kick the can down the road a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why can't I flourish and benefit off of another person's suffering?
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Especially if we're a product of chance and time and things like that, and it's about survival ultimately. I mean, evolutionary scientists have admitted that much. It's about survival. I think one guy wrote a book called "The Selfish Gene."
Yeah,
His friend.
Yeah, his boy. Yeah.
So you got to answer these questions, like, and this is what Sean kind of pressed him on, in a friendly manner.
Yeah.
Maybe the guest on, you don't want to be hostile towards the guest. things like that.
Right.
But like on the cool, like why should I care about race? And there's real, we didn't touch on a lot of portions, but Coleman is, Brother Coleman is appearing before congressional committees and testifying and things like that. We're talking about legislation here, and that has everything to do with morality.
Mm-hmm.
And the morality that you're proposing to me sounds like a social construct, something that you want everybody to agree to, which is implicitly implying relativism. But the question is, how come I can't flourish along with your suffering? And I think that's what Sean was asking.
Right.
Of course, Sean being a brother in Christ, he got the answer.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right.
That. But the moral oughtness is there, and you can't get that from a is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that's a fallacy.
Wow.
And so once again, that's another hurdle for my dear brother Coleman.
Hey, my man, struggling with them hurdles, dog. He's struggling with them. But I'm gonna take it a step even further, MJ. So I kind of gleaned from the way that he was framing his answer. It seemed like he comes from like a utilitarian approach. So he was using phrases like increasing the sum of like well-being, or however he framed it, and things like that. Framing matters and moral issues in the terms of suffering versus flourishing. Like I think it sounded to me like he was kind of coming from a utilitarian perspective there. And to your point, I mean, let's bring it home here to America. Right now, there are more people flourishing in America, including African Americans, than were subjected to some form of suffering during slavery. I want to say that there's maybe 12 million slaves were brought here to this continent. And I think it was, I think they grew to more than that, or whatever the number was. But there's certainly more people. There are more Black Americans living in America right now than were enslaved. And the reality is we do live in, I would argue probably the freest country in the world. To my knowledge, I mean, we're certainly doing pretty well just as the Black community, if you compare us to communities elsewhere. We're doing pretty good financially. Now, I am in no way excusing, slavery. I'm speaking somewhat facetiously here, right? My point is, for everybody that suffered during slavery, on one level, we have more people who are flourishing from it now, for all the wealth that was gained through cotton and tobacco and all that kind of stuff, as a result of these people being subjected to forced labor. America has done pretty good. And America entered into the Industrial Revolution on the back of King Cotton, that was being shipped up north for the textile industry. That was our beginnings in the Industrial Revolution. So, for everybody who's flourishing now, we're playing a numbers game. More people have flourished. So that seems to me then that, okay, well, I guess slavery was all right. If we're just talking about increasing overall, happiness or well-being. Secondly, to be honest, I mean, you don't see a sort of like universal tribalism amongst baboons, badgers, and bears or something like that. You know what I mean? Like they don't have like some universal code to stick together. That's not something you find in nature. You know what I mean? They've got their own sect, they got their pack, and that's who they ride with. Yep. And so when it comes to Europeans, they was riding with Europeans and said, hey, we got this land over here. We want to flourish over here where these Native Americans are. You know what I mean? In order for us to flourish, and we can't flourish without some forced help. So we're gonna go ahead and get these Africans, and we're gonna subject them to slavery, and we're gonna flourish off their backs. And we're also gonna, not honor treaties with these Native Americans so that we can have their land, so we can flourish on that too. That's what happened. And on a utilitarian perspective, why is that wrong? On an evolutionary perspective, you know what I'm saying? If we're just evolved, sapiens, why is that wrong? It's not. If naturalism is true, slavery was right. Or at least morally neutral. Yeah. One or the other. It makes a whole lot of sense to go enslave other people, for your own flourishing, if that's the metric that we're going by. And so here's the thing, like, if it is the case, and this is why I like moral philosophy, because it's not just about these abstract ideas, but it's about applying it to the real world and see how these frameworks hold up. Mm-hmm. If it is the case that, they enslaved Africans, and let's say that for some reason, like slavery was never abolished, and for whatever reason, Africans came to accept their role as being slaves in the society, and everybody moves on around the globe with no problem with it, and everybody's flourishing off of the backs of Africans. If that were to be the case, like from a utilitarian standpoint, it seems to me that there's really no objection to be made against that. Or if everybody, agreed that, hey, we're just going to kind of squash this thing with the Nazis in Germany, and yeah, they killed a bunch of people, but we kind of see their point. They was trying to ultimately they were just trying to secure their land and make sure because that was their rationale. They wanted people from the soil to flourish in their community. It's like, well, all right, that's cool. We can get down with that. Y'all done killing. All right, we're cool with you. Everybody was going to move on. Would that make it okay? Like, is it cool now that is the Holocaust all right? Of course not. Of course not. You know what I'm saying? Like, like well-being is not like it's not like X's and O's. It's not like, you can't just sit there with an abacus and kind of calculate it or whatever. It's not that kind of a thing, where you can kind of get to this sum that really works for everybody. No, it's wrong if you enslave people. You know what I'm saying? Particularly this, on some sort of racial basis, or it's wrong if you murder people because they're Jews and so forth. Like it's wrong. It's wrong as wrong can be, and it doesn't matter, who flourishes off of it, how many flourishes off of it, even if the amount of people who flourish off of it outweigh those who suffer. It's wrong.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And I think that our deepest intuitions, point to that it being wrong, and I think that we have to deal with those intuitions. And utilitarianism, when you put it when you put it on paper and see how it really plays out to its logical conclusions, doesn't jive with our moral intuitions, and I think is rightly rejected just on that basis. Go ahead.
That's good, man. This is really good. Because a certain apologist always used to say, why does there have to be a moral lawgiver? Because when questions of morality are posed, they're always posed to a person or about a person or both. There's the idea of personhood is embedded in moral philosophy, and the whole study that you just broke down, Adam. You said something real quick on the consciousness and I was like, man, that I never thought about it like that, because you said that our worldview starts with a conscious being, which is amazing. And then I was like, but I started to keep going with that. And like, how do we have knowledge of that conscious being? Well, it's, natural evolution. But I'm just in the Bible, the first line of the Bible lets us know the type of being as far as him being conscious and even some of his desires. Like I was like, man, that's crazy. Because then the other part is, you said what, maybe 200-300 years ago, this dude was writing about consciousness and questioning.
Yeah, 17th century, Zara Yaakov, yeah.
Right, but the Bible, at least Genesis 1, that's thousands of years. So you think Moses was thinking about moral philosophy or like, But then here's my question to everyone who disbelieves. What other than God would explain him writing that? Like there's certain things biblical writers seem to have knowledge of that's way ahead of their time. Unless you're willing to concede that someone who's even more ahead of their time told them.
Interesting.
Anyway, quick side note, but that was really interesting. And I think your point about I was thinking about lions, because I like watching Animal Planet and all that stuff. When there's one pride of lions, they're looking out for their pride. Not only are they looking out for their pride, they're trying to kill the other prides. They're not trying to like make sure all the lions win.
It's not at all.
It's not a collective. There's no co-op. So once again, that goes back to human exceptionalism, because even if we take him, Coleman, for what he's saying, clearly we're the only species on the planet that operates like that, or could even think to operate in a utilitarian way, if that was the right way to be. I'm at this point, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying no other species can even have the conversation or have the interaction to decide this is what's best for the collective. Anyway, so those are a couple of side notes. So I'm gonna share my screen again, and as I do that, I want to bring up a couple issues in general, not just for Coleman, but for atheism in general, really. Epistemological and ontological. So as I'm pulling this up, basically, for those who may not remember or know, epistemology is how you know what you know, and ontology is essentially like what is there to know. What is an actual factual thing that can be known.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about good and evil, and thereby the moral law, or why there must be one, because you have to be able to differentiate, right? And once again, way before our time, well, not way before, C.S. Lewis, but then I was going to talk about somebody else. But C.S. Lewis in the last century said this: they know that the Lord, not merely obedience to the Lord, is righteous and commands righteousness because he loves it. He enjoins what is good because it is good, because he is good. Hence, his laws have immense truth, intrinsic validity, rock bottom reality, being rooted in his own nature. And that part's important. Now, I did something recently on the Euthyphro, I can never say it, dilemma.
Oh yeah, Euthyphro, yeah.
And this deals with part of that. I'm not going to unpack it now for sake of time, but in another lecture, C.S. Lewis said, God is not merely good, but goodness. Goodness is not merely divine, but God. The last one, he wrote in Mere Christianity, the moment you say that one set of moral ideas can be better than another, you are, in fact, measuring them both by a standard that one of them conforms to that standard more nearly than the other. But the standard that measures two things is something different from either. You are, in fact, comparing them both with some real morality, admitting that there is such a thing as a real right, or as a real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get nearer to that real right than others. So this is the reality of what we're all saying. This is the reality of what Coleman is saying. It's the reality of what we're saying. We're saying there are certain of ideas about morality or moral ideas in the realm of morality that are right, and we're saying other ones that are not these ones are wrong. Coleman is saying the same thing, but therein lies the problem, because if we can't ground morality, then we can never even have the discussion in a legitimate way. So the ontological issue is, to me, for the skeptic, for Coleman, I would say, what, and Sean did ask this kind of in a way, what is it? Like, what are we talking about? Like, if I said, if you ask a random person to define love, what would they say? Define good. Define it. Don't point to an example. Define it. And I really like Lewis's definition here. And so that's the ontological issue. What is this thing we're talking about, morality? What is good? What is evil? The epistemological is, how do you even, epistemology is how you know what you know. So how did you come to know that murder was wrong? So you maybe, my boy told me, my parents told me, I read it in a book. There's a lot of access points to that knowledge, right? But once again, the Bible speaks to the reality that an atheist can know or have access to this moral knowledge without knowing the one who created that moral knowledge. Romans 2:14 and 15, it says that the law of God is written on all of our hearts. And I want people to think for a second. That makes perfect sense. Because let's imagine if God is God. What would happen, rather, if he didn't do that? What would happen if he only gave moral standards to his children, his Christians, or whatever you want to call it? What if the rest of the 2/3 of the world had no access to morality? That's an unlivable situation on the other direction, right?
Right.
So God, in order to create a livable planet, had to give everyone access to certain moral knowledge, certain degrees of moral knowledge, certain facts, certain moral facts. Now, other moral facts, like in the Bible says, when Jesus says, even if you look at the woman, you committed adultery in your heart, that's a special revelation. We get that later. But Cain killed Abel and murder was wrong, and there was no law. So you don't need the law to know murder is wrong. You need moral intuition, and you need certain moral facts to be true to know that's wrong. But the fact that you don't give credit to whom credit is due does not mean credit's not due that person. Yeah, if I go to Sistine Chapel and I look, I'm like, man, this is crazy. Look how beautiful whoever did this painted it. And you keep it, yo, that's Michelangelo. That's Michelangelo. Let me tell you about him. Like, no, who it is doesn't matter. Just like, look at this thing. But this thing would not be that thing without a person creating that thing.
Right.
And so it's not enough for, as Coleman does have access to moral knowledge, that's not enough though. And that's where I appreciate Sean pushing back, because the bigger problem is, even if Coleman or anyone was able to get the whole world to reach this utilitarian, whatever kind of morality, it would still be useless if you didn't know the purpose for life. This is my last point. Y'all, like I said, my channel is called Relentless Pursuit of Purpose for a reason.
Yeah.
If you do not know the purpose for life, you'll never know if you're violating a moral standard, because you have to know to what end. If I don't understand the objective of the game of football, then holding makes no sense to me. Right. Nor do I care about it when I get called for it, because the purpose is not my purpose. In an atheistic framework, life, the universe, earth, everything has no purpose and no meaning. Now, some atheists say, well, that's just how it is. And they rest there. And that's where you have to rest if you're going to be honest with it. Because you otherwise, as the book Stealing from God, you have to steal components of a theistic or Christian worldview that you know need to fit in a real worldview, but they don't fit in yours currently. So you're just going to borrow them, put them with yours.
Hope it works out.
Do that. You know what I mean? So
right.
You can't. When I say you can't do that, y'all, I'm thinking philosophically that is a fallacious way to reach your conclusion. I'll put it like that. And Sean did a great job of hitting on that, the idea that if God exists, life has purpose. Now, that's the last thing I'll say with the morality is, most times, when Coleman's talking about we should do whatever we can to help other people and even animals flourish and to prevent human suffering, and as you did an awesome job, Adam, is comparing those concepts. But once again, I don't know if this is a real category, but he needs to ground flourishing.
Right. What does that mean? Right.
Yeah, that's not. I don't know. We don't have a term in apologetics, but that's another grounding problem.
Grounding flourishing. Yeah.
You need to ground your flourishing, because once again, if you don't know the purpose for life, or if naturalism is true and we're just a blind collection of atoms just dancing to the tune of our DNA, like Dawkins said, life has no purpose. But if life has no purpose, how do you define flourishing?
Oh no, that's a great point, because I mean, for all we know, flourishing for me, if I'm a psychopath, it could be to kill as many people as I possibly can. I mean, I understand now a psychopath is like that. I'm just saying, but like, it could be for me. Maybe I just want to kill as many people, harm as many people as I can. That might be flourishing.
That might be.
I might really get a kick out of it.
And who am I to judge? Judge not. You judge Christians. Now, here's the last thing, and this actually kind of ties in race. It ties everything in, I think, and this is a true story. This just happened last week. Y'all, I think everybody knows I live in Chicago. Don't believe everything you hear, but this one's true. So last week, we had a guest come into the house and got here. He was a business guest of my mother-in-law's company, actually. Got carjacked out front of my house. Dang. They pistol whipped him, stole his car. More I could say, but my point is this. Now, this is why I say everything gets wrapped up. And if you really believe humans have value in the way the Bible speaks about it, even if you don't believe the Bible, and if you really believe morality is a true thing, then you got to keep that same energy when you're evaluating every other aspect of life. And that's with the rest of his interview with Sean, with the CRT stuff and the race stuff. I'm like, bro, this is so inconsistent.
Yeah,
probably have to do a whole other live on that. But here's my one point. When he says we should do whatever we can to help other people and flourish, and like, well, you can't ground flourishing. Is the purpose of life simply to not suffer? Now, you could ask that question to an atheist or a prosperity preacher, because they're guilty too. They make people believe that if you ever suffer for even a second, that's not God's will. Like, you're doing something wrong. You need more faith. You know, Adam, about all.
Oh, yeah. Terrible. So, and they're wrong for that, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we call it out on both sides, y'all. Just to be clear. But here's where I want to tie this all in. It happened to be two young black men, which I hated more than anything else, because I'm like, man, I would just wish this, because I know it's a stereotype, but this ain't helping me convince other people. And the gentleman happened to be white, and I'm like, this is okay. So those two individuals, for whatever reason, but it's often poor, marginalized individuals who themselves do not feel like they are flourishing. Now, if the goal is human flourishing, do I have the right to do whatever I need to do to help myself join the flourishing? I see everybody else flourishing. I want to flourish too.
Mm-hmm.
But nowhere that I live do I see any resources. Nowhere do I live do I see the educational environment that would allow or produce somebody who could flourish in society. Nowhere in my life am I used to flourishing. Mm-hmm. So I do want to flourish. So we have the same goal, me and you, Mr. Coleman, but my path to that goal is different. The question is now, so we got all the components, right? This is race, this is morality. Like, what gives you the right to tell me that my method towards flourishing is wrong?
Right.
And if you do tell me it's wrong, and let's say you're right about it being wrong, and I do agree, obviously I don't agree with carjacking for any reason, but if I'm wrong and the goal is human flourishing, then you should help me flourish. Either him and you, Mr. Coleman, individually, or the government. Mm-hmm. And this is where a lot of the, now we put it full circle. That's why I don't say CRT matters. I say addressing racism matters in a real, practical, tangible way.
Of course.
Because of all this. Do you see what I'm saying? So like now when you go full circle, that crime, because let me tell you what we found out. Because the carjackings nowadays is not to go to a chop shop. So what they're doing is they take a car because they need to use it in a drive-by, or they take it so that like a higher up can go to a funeral and not be spotted in their own car because people watch cars. That's how deep it is, right?
Wow.
They found the car. I guess I can't say too much because it's not a closed case. But anyway, they found the car.
Yeah. I enjoy. Please don't get Tru-ID wrapped up in some sort of like Chicago,
not at all,
Sopranos type of situation. Like, let's not do that.
Anyway, they found it, and it was involved in an incident. The point is this. I don't know all the details, but I'm guessing that incident that it was involved in was in some way connected to money, which will help them flourish. So I want to flourish, Mr. Coleman, but ain't nothing around me to help me flourish. Nobody seems to care that I'm not flourishing or we're not flourishing. So I'm gonna go take because the reality is you got extra. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna go take what you got, and then now we can both flourish, right? That's cool.
Yeah, you be all right.
Yeah, you be.
No, I get a little step up, you a little step down. We're closer. That's good, right? We're more close to equally flourishing, right? Or flourishing at all. And obviously, I'm being stupid and facetious, but that's the point, because you got to keep that same energy all the way through your worldview. Like Matt, you said them 3 questions to assess a worldview, and as Adam has said, them hurdles is what was the dude in the Olympics? Didn't he trip over like every hurdle? That's how it's looking.
I'm about to find the clip. You say, yeah.
That's how it's looking right now.
Go ahead, put that in there.
Hey man, matter of fact, I'm trying to flourish. Let me get them reparations, my dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know Coleman Hughes is against reparations. I'm being funny, but like Coleman Hughes is against reparations. Hey, that would help me flourish.
Absolutely.
Cut me that check, my brother.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? No, but seriously, those great points, man. I want to kind of bring it back home to what you said, like, because I do think that how you answer these big questions, it definitely does trickle down into how you answer the more immediate questions. I won't say small questions, but more immediate questions. So, for example, I pulled something from this interview. Here you go, right? So, Sean McDowell asked, and maybe I'll just play the clip, but Sean McDowell asked Coleman Hughes, how does he respond to the notion that America is racist? Or is America racist? It was kind of like he posed that question. Now, I think that, I know that question is floating around a lot, and I think it's actually poorly worded because it's kind of, America is, if you talk about as like a social construct, as like a government, I mean, it's like an abstract. So it's like, how could that be racist? Or if you're talking about the sum total of Americans, well, I mean, obviously not everybody is not racist. So I mean, I just think that's a weird, fuzzy way to ask the question. But nevertheless, it gets asked. And so that was what Coleman Hughes was asked about it. And it was very interesting. He says that you in answering that question, you have essentially two options. You will either compare America to other countries and see where they stack up in terms of racism. And his argument would be that we're way less racist than some other parts of the world, or I don't know if he would say all, but at least some other parts of the world. And so he feels that America comes out looking all right in that regard. And he says, or you're going to, so that's one option. If answering the question, is America racist compared to other countries? The other option, according to Coleman Hughes, would be to compare America to some sort of utopia, and then see where we stack up that way. And he believes that to be an irrational way to go about adjudicating where America falls in terms of racism. We shouldn't be comparing us to to a utopia, because there is no utopia. I think it's my understanding that's where he's coming from. He believes that to be the two options on the table in terms of how to answer the question, is America racist? Now, regardless of how you answer that question, I think it's very telling that in his worldview, there's this absence, according to his own admission, of some sort of objective obligation and objective moral value. In the absence of an objective moral standard, in the absence of some objective point of obligation, maybe you do have this, only those two options. But from a theistic perspective, that's essentially a false dichotomy, because it's not just that I can compare America against other nations. It's not the case that I have to compare America to some sort of utopia. I can evaluate America in relation to the moral standard. that's right there in between. I'm saying there is an objective morality that we are all beholden to. And I can simply say, does America meet that objective morality, or does it not? Does it meet the standard, or doesn't it? Have Americans and the government, if you will, however you want to construe it, have they aligned with the kind of obligations that one ought to towards a fellow image bearer, towards an image bearer? The answer is either yes or no, right? And so we can look at, where does America stand in relation to the moral standard? Now, I'm not going to get into, how we can, parse that out. But my whole point is, in the absence of an objective moral standard, in the absence of a fixed point of obligation, you are left with this sort of dichotomy that Coleman Hughes forwarded. But I'm saying that because you're lacking these moral resources in your worldview, you don't have the necessary tools to rightly adjudicate the kinds of questions that you base your platform on. That's what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? And so I think that, again, when it comes to, and I'll bring it back to a point that I made earlier, when it comes to whether we talk about the nation or whether we talk about, the Black community, it seems to me that these hurdles that Coleman Hughes keeps tripping over are building blocks that any community or society needs in order to bring about the kind of human flourishing that he thinks that we should be striving toward. And I promise this is not like an infomercial, but I'm going to read a segment from my chapter in Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel, because I speak to this, and it's very interesting. Let me backtrack for a second, because I am a hip hop head. So I want to read something else first. This is a quotation from Nas off his new album. It's very fascinating. He has a song called "Ugly," and I want to kind of touch on this first, because I think it'll ground the point that I'm about to make. But he says, he's talking about kind of like street life. And he says, how can we hug it out after we slugged it out? We should be buying acres, adjusting each other's crowns. That was your brother back then. How could you gun him down? You know what I mean? I think it's a really profound statement. And it kind of touches on this intuition that, dang, man, in our community, we gunning each other down, but we should be building each other up. Like, that's a fundamental idea that I think people who care about the Black community share. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, man, like, we should have like this sense of brotherhood. Nevertheless, I'm saying that the kind of atheism that your boy Coleman is advancing can't account for that deep intuition of brotherhood and cooperation and building one another up that I think is so native to our community. You know what I'm saying? And so let me end up with this. In my chapter on Black atheism, in the conclusion section, like right at the end, I say it this way. The reality is that the reality is that we cannot build a strong community on a foundation of weak ideas. If we are to move forward as a people, we cannot do so with an atheistic worldview that does not provide solid answers to life's most profound questions. As we have seen, the affirmation of God's existence is not an irrational, feel-good belief or a moral impediment to our people. The contingency argument, order in nature, rationality, human value, and the resurrection are signposts of reason and evidence which point to the true and living God. And so, essentially, I was saying that there are both eternal and immediate consequences for the worldviews that we hold to. We can't afford to imbibe bad ideas. And if you have a worldview that can't adequately account for morality, consciousness, human value, fairness, justice, and so forth, you kind of parse it out there, or even our very existence, that's not the kind of worldview that we can build on. We can't build a strong community on a foundation of weak ideas. And so that's why, in terms of in the African American context, I maintain that atheism is really of just no utility. We're trying to make sense of the African American experience. And I do take that making sense of experience to be a test, as Matthew Jackson pointed out, of a worldview. Atheism is unlivable. And I think that we can see in our own immediate history how that's the case. I mean, when you think about, I could just spell some names: Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells. We can talk about, Henry Highland Garnett. I can just go on down the line of like freedom fighters and various people who are significant in our history. And if we ask the question, why are they significant? The answer is that because they're morally significant, right? Harriet Tubman is morally significant. MLK is morally significant. He was going against what others believed to be, appropriate, what I'm saying, and was okay with their flourishing at the time. You had a bunch of Klansmen that was flourishing real well, at the time when Martin Luther King was doing his thing. But nevertheless, he was bucking against the broader consensus, or the broader acceptance of the notion that sort of flourishing is okay. No, it's not okay. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's a moral concept that I don't think can fit snugly within Coleman Hughes's perspective. I think MLK was right about it, but I think that Coleman Hughes would struggle to ground why MLK was right about it. And so, I said it to say, and this is all in love. This is not like a beat up Coleman Hughes perspective, but I just think that this, that conversation with Sean McDowell gave us an opportunity to, evaluate some of his ideas and see how atheism plays out and the shortcomings thereof. So, but yeah, as we finish out, man, what do y'all want to say? Let people know what's going on in your channels, what you got coming up, and so forth. What you got, Alex? Oh, you're muted, man.
Yeah, my bad. So yeah, like I said, I got that year in review coming out at the end of 2021. Got some exciting things coming in 2022. Can't believe it's been a year already. But yeah, man, just stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would love it if you went and subscribed to my channel, Relentless Pursuit of Purpose, and just let me know what you think about the content.
Cool. MJ, what you got, bro?
So I too have a year-end review. We're also going to be reviewing some books that we have read and that we felt like were pretty good. There are some bad books that we read.
Alt lines.
Oh, snap. Shots fired.
Right on time.
Oh, snap.
But no, like Alex, I'll be rolling some stuff out in the new year, and we're going to be pursuing some apologetic method, be getting into a little bit of epistemology. Got some other developments going on with a few other brothers in Christ. Business is picking up on the debate scene, so we always have our hands to the plow when it comes to prepping and researching for these debates and things like that. So just a lot of good stuff going on, and God's kingdom is still spreading.
Amen. Absolutely. No doubt, man. Well, I definitely got some videos coming up. Y'all can be on the lookout for that. Some podcasts coming up. It's got some cool features. I'm not even going to spill the beans yet. Working on some. I'm working on a course. Hopefully I'll be dropping in 2022 online. That'll be available. So I got that in the works. Got that popping. Y'all be on the lookout. Still pushing the Urban Apologetics book. Actually, since the last time I was up here, I think it was we received an award from Christianity Today for being
Amen.
the I think it's Apologetics and Evangelism Book of the Year. So y'all definitely encourage you to cop that. You know what I mean? And yeah, man, I just want to say, shout out to Sean McDowell, shout out to Coleman Hughes on a great discussion. Again, this is not a bad session, but we're just evaluating ideas, and I'm praying for that brother, man. I like that guy, man. I hope he continues to pursue truth as far as truth will lead. So that being said, y'all know what it is. Love God, love people, take care of the things that God blesses you with. Peace.